Cthul-You by Damian G. Walter. When I first heard about Cthul-You, I was skeptical to say the least. Like most people, I thought anything that promised so much had to be bogus. Like one of those online dating sites populated by 24,753 lonely IT technicians seeking potential girlfriends of the female variety and no potential females waiting to be befriended. I was glad that kind of thing wasn't really my scene, but then being a follower of the occult wasn't any easier. So when the email that would ultimately lead me to my Dark Lord and Master appeared in my inbox, you can be sure I had my reservations. Sometimes in life, it's the way you stumble into things that makes them special. A friend told me about some other friend who swore they could forward me some email with a link in that would take me to the only site of its type on the net. From the get-go, the site strikes me as interesting. Usually the photos of animal sacrifice are obvious fakes, but not here. And you could tell that the guy advertising for a demonic soulmate was displaying real horns, not the joke shop variety. All the pics here were real original. And they got me real excited. So I signed up. Now, if I wasn't sold before, this hooked me. At first, I took it as a problem. I'm typing in my member name, Typhine 2352 BC, when a little red "Name Already Registered" sign flashes up. This surprises me. I use that name everywhere. Typhine is my favorite non-corporeal demon entity. 2352 BC is the date of the last true pan-astral invasion. Maybe 5 other people in the world could tell you who or what Typhine is, and the debate is still raging about whether pan-astral planes even exist. Finding these combined together? Never gonna happen. Before I know it, I've hit enter. I'm expecting a rejection, but instead, a profile page comes up. In my name. My real name. The one my mum, who wouldn't sleep well if she knew I was a cultist, calls me. What do you know? I think. I already joined. But I didn't. But I am. At the bottom of the page, where I'd expect to see Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal logos, are a bunch of arcane sigils so small I can barely read them. I scroll through it all until I reach, "I understand the conditions under which I enter into this agreement," and tick accept. Nobody ever reads the legalese. Race. Mortal. Body. Human. Obese. Smokes. No. Drinks. Rarely. Drugs. Ceremonial only. Sacrifices. Every day. Languages. English, fluent, Latin, Sumerian, Klingon. I am looking for a genuine, involved, and determined demonic entity. I've had too many experiences of dark powers whose only interest is in making themselves look bad. I want to see this world destroyed. I want you to want that too. My life. I work in a Burger Boy because people make me sick. And at Burger Boy, I get to make people sick. I only eat Burger Boys and now weigh 250 pounds. I want to be obese. When this world burns, my flesh will fuel the flames. Things others think about me. I'm fat and ugly. I've not always been fat. I've always been ugly. No one I know now remembers I used to be average weight. No one I know now thinks anything about me except, who is that ugly fat person? This is the way I want it. Message me if you want to see this world burn. So I spent most of the night cruising through the personals on Cthul-You. I like to have checked out every option before I make a decision, And if that's the case with retail purchases, then it's twice the case when I'm selecting a new Dark Lord to obey. Among the dross, I find some familiar faces. I have pretty good Fadar, so I'm not surprised to find out that JT, my shift manager and burger boy, or Miss Stimson, my primary grade school teacher, or even Pastor Miller, all have hardcore demonic tendencies. What got me was that they would be advertising it so blatantly. Did they think a stupid false name and a latex mask could keep that kind of thing disguised? But then I guess it's no different than the stupid disguises they wear in the real world. It's in the nature of the occult that there are far more leaders than followers. Every Joe thinks he has it in him to destroy the world. Most people embrace the occult as a way of making themselves special. They want to rain down brimstone on the world. They want to. It's more important that they do it than that it happens. But they have it all wrong. You want to know about the scene? Rule number 1. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not even about the Dark Lord. It's about destroying the world. That's all you need to know. I went past Mark's profile twice before I even noticed it. The page was almost empty, not even a picture. Mark's words were few and simple, but they burned themselves into my heart and soul. They whispered in my head like a confession from the lips of a murderer. They made me feel like I had never felt before in my life. They gave me hope. Once you give yourself to another, you can never take even the tiniest piece of yourself back. For a year, he commanded me at a distance, but all I dreamt of was seeing him for real. I wanted it so much, but I could only wait for his command. I could not control him. He had to make it happen. I was terrified he would abandon me, so I waited and did exactly as I was told. And then, one day the message came. A street address, and a time, and his command for me to come. I didn't even think about not going. I had no doubt what I would find. I'm at the door, and it's not like I have any questions. It's not like I'm getting suspicious, but the door is wrong. It's no different to any other door on the street, but then this isn't just any street. I would have to call it an avenue, maybe even a boulevard. I guess I didn't picture Mark living somewhere like this. A castle, maybe, at the top of a mountain, or even an MTV celebrity crib. But not this place. It's just so suburban. The lady who comes to the door is pure wasp. From her twin set in pearls to her blonde curled hair with the permatan skin and red lipstick smile. But not at all sexual, like she has all of the signs of, but none of the threat. "Mark?" she says as the red lips smile in greeting. "Why, yes. Who should I say is calling?" Is this the maid or something? Beneath her pleasant demeanor, I can see the look of disgust that flickers past her eyes as she beckons me through the door. At 250 pounds, I was vast. Now at 300, I'm a monster. Add to that my permanently attached burger boy uniform, and I must stink like one. We go through to what a realtor would describe as a spacious living room, with the kind of shiny hardwood floor people get careers as divorce attorneys so they can afford. It's toasty warm inside, like a shopping mall, only with air that hasn't been breathed 20 times before. There's a log fire crackling in the hearth. In front of the fire stands this guy with his back to me. He's tall and slender like an athlete, dressed in beige slacks and a jersey so expensive it shows no brands. He flashes me a smile of ice-white teeth and a haircut I've only ever seen before on network news anchormen. "Hi, I'm Mark's father." Oh boy. "And you must be a friend of Mark's?" "Kind of, Mr. Mark's dad. I'm Mark's first true follower. I owe everything to Mark. If I were a sentence, I'd be on Mark's lips. If I were a weapon, I'd be in Mark's hand. I can and will kill on Mark's command. Yes, I say. Idiot! We're always happy to welcome a friend of Mark's. The blonde woman reappears under Mark's father's outstretched arm. Dad almost hides the "who the hell is this" look he shoots Mom. It doesn't matter. They'll burn with the rest. But they won't, the voice of doubt begins to tell me. Well, says Mom, Mark is in his room. You can go on up. In his room, I think, as I lumber up the grand, curving stairwell. Mark is playing Xbox when I first see him. He doesn't even look at me where I stand, my bulk filling the door to his room. He just sits on the edge of his bed, fixating on a 72-inch widescreen TV as his thumbs manipulate the controller. On the wall is a huge Yu-Gi-Oh poster. I didn't even know they made them that big. The rest of the room looks like the R&D section of Toys R Us. He says hello, but I barely hear him. I'm breathing so hard. I'm wheezing like some terrified animal being dragged to the slaughter. I hate the wheezing. Is the only thing I don't like about the new obese me. He has the haircut Spielberg invented in the 80s. The blonde mop that lets you know, this is a good kid. This is a brave kid. Good and brave. You really are a freak. But this is the Spielberg kid for the new millennium, the emotionally manipulative, spoiled brat who screams for mommy just to make us feel guilty. I thought you would be a chubby, but this is just gross. And what is that smell? The kid stares up at me, eyes shining with a familiar look of disgust and lust. The kids at Burger Boy used to look at me that way, like it hurt, but they just couldn't stop. I used to want it. Now it just makes me feel dirty. My voice breaks as I beg him to tell me the truth. Everything I wrote to you was BS. It was all stuff I found on Google. If you weren't so fat and stupid, you could have figured that out. I am fat and stupid. So, I own your ass now, right? Yes. And you have to do whatever I say, right? I'm yours to command. Cool. I've got hundreds of you suckers now, all obeying my every command. Like my very own army of darkness or something. The kid pushes something into my big, sweaty hand. Part of me expects to look down and see a G.I. Joe. What I see is a knife. Just an ordinary kitchen knife with a wooden handle and a cutting blade. But scrawled onto the metal in magic marker are sigils I know I've seen before. He gives me the command. Soft words with strong meaning. And hidden amongst them, as though whispered from beyond the stars, I can hear the sound of Cthul-You calling.
The Quick and the Dead by Nick Moulton. I arrived at Dr. O'Carroll's asylum for the deceased in a black carriage. As the fair-haired young doctor helped me down, I screamed that I was still alive and wrenched free of him. 2 mortuary attendants held me down and injected me with a foul-smelling substance they called formaldehyde. Then my husband, dressed in impeccable mourning, produced my death certificate and committal papers. They fastened me to a trolley and wheeled me through the building. By twisting my head, I was able to see endless green walls, swinging double doors, and the beshrouded forms of the unfortunates who shared my plight. We stopped. I heard the rattle of keys and the groan of hinges. Then the trolley rolled into a dimly lit chamber, and my straps were unfastened. The mortuary attendants blocked the door. A flabby, balding tough and a vile little man with red hair. The fat oaf waved a lordly hand. "Here we are, miss. Home sweet home." The room was a windowless vault with whitewashed walls, furnished with a lead coffin. The only light filtered through a tiny grill in the top of the door. I protested the lack of light, and the redhead told me that it was against Dr. O'Carroll's rules. Sunlight and fresh air would make a woman in my condition too excitable. Nor was I allowed to read, write, or have any form of amusement. "What am I to do?" I asked. "Stare at the bare walls all day? That's what most of them do," the thin man said. The door banged shut, leaving me in twilight. I was still weak from my illness, and my movements were slow and clumsy. I shuffled around the vault like an old woman, running my hands over the lime-washed walls. Apart from the coffin, which rested on a stone shelf opposite the door, there were no furnishings whatsoever, not even the sparse comforts of prison. I had no Bible, no plate or pitcher, no chamber pot. For a night and half a day I raged and wept. It is a fearful thing to die. More fearful still is to be treated as one of the dead. At last the bolt slid aside. The light poured in and I stumbled out. The young doctor I had screamed at on my arrival took my arm and introduced himself as Dr. Morgan. "Would you accompany me on a turn around the grounds?" he said. "Is this a privilege you usually offer corpses, or am I receiving a special favour?" I inquired, and watched him blush to the roots of his blonde hair. He was a tolerably handsome man, if a little short. "I have a scientific interest in your case," he said. "However, it would be better if you were not to mention it to other patients. Dr. O'Carroll does not approve of favouritism. Am I such a remarkable cadaver to excite your curiosity so? Or is there perhaps some uncertainty about my diagnosis?" He stammered that from the moment I stepped down from the carriage I had exhibited many fascinating symptoms. Then he plunged into medical jargon so impenetrable that one would need a scalpel to cut through it. I let him rattle on, noticing the sidelong glances he gave me. Men used to look at me in that way before I was married. If I were truly dead, he surely would never have looked at me so. At last I began to see a way out of this hell. I was awakened before dawn by the rattle of keys in the door. Before I could utter a word, the orderlies had me by the elbows and I was pinioned face down on a trolley. I struggled hard as they wheeled me to a place that reeked of ether and formaldehyde. "Where am I? Please." "Keep still, miss. Dr. O'Carroll has to operate." The red-headed fool sounded almost kind. I could see gloved hands, a green-coated figure leaning over me. The surgeon's soft Irish accent carried clearly through his mask. "You're in the pathology laboratory, Mrs. Hetherington. To stabilize your condition, we must fit you with a galvanic battery. Please remain still." "I am not dead!" I remember nothing more of the procedure beyond my overpowering horror. There was a knock on the door of my vault. I rolled over and attempted to cover my eyes with my arm. "Go away!" The door opened. A hand touched my back. "Mrs. Hetherington?" I glared at Dr. Morgan and pulled my shroud around my shoulders to hide the battery. "I don't want anyone to see me like this." "I won't look." He turned his back on me. "May I stay and talk to you?" "You shouldn't have allowed them to do it." "If Dr. O'Carroll believes a procedure necessary, I am in no position to oppose him. He's England's finest resurrectionist." "I am not dead. My husband has falsely imprisoned me here." "Mrs. Hetherington, your notes are quite clear. You died of peritonitis a fortnight ago. Your husband had you conveyed to Chelsea Emergency Mortuary and begged Dr. O'Carroll to attempt resurrection. The procedure was a success." "Then where is my husband now?" "He cannot see you. A strict condition of our being allowed to run this establishment is that those in our care have no further contact with the living. There are moral dangers." But I can still feel my heart beating. He pressed his warm fingers to my temple and held them there for nearly a minute. It felt comforting. Then he shook his head. "You have no pulse, Mrs. Hetherington. Amputees feel itches in their missing limbs. I believe you are experiencing something similar." The certainty of his diagnosis sliced away my fear. Sarah Hetherington, respectable wife of Charles Hetherington, was dead. I brushed my fingers over my dead hair, my dead face, my dead body. I wanted to know this strange, new, dead me. I stood up, deliberately letting my shroud fall open at the neck. "Tell me, Doctor, do I not look alive to you?" He stepped back and blushed. Again. "Dr. O'Carroll will be pleased to hear that you are recovering so well," he said. "If I could not have life, I would seize every compensation offered to me." His name was Richard. He was unmarried and he lived in the village. He had been a houseman at St. Thomas's Hospital until he chanced to attend a lecture by the Imperial Resurrectionist Foundation. Dr. O'Carroll told us of miracles. He brought out little Molly Fisher, 6 months dead of scarlet fever. She danced on the stage and wrote her name on a slate. I was in the presence of a new god. What could I do but serve him? More than 200 have been brought back since Molly. At present we can only help a select few, but 20th century man will be born to immortality. As he spoke, I examined the back of my hand. My nails had finally stopped growing, and the embalming fluid in my veins stood out pale blue against the skin. I wondered if Dr. Morgan had noticed that I was starting to look like a corpse. Would our conversations continue once I became one of the slack-jawed creatures that shambled about the gardens during periods of exercise? I forced the thought out of my mind. And what benefit will it be for any of us, Dr. Morgan, if we are unable to love? Why should I carry on mouldering in an asylum if I am to be kept from passion or feeling by fear of moral danger? I would sooner go direct to the grave. He gasped at the coarseness of my language. Yes, the grave. I am not afraid to use the word. Indeed, I would welcome it. He stared at me, and then his eyes dropped to the floor. What benefit indeed, he said. But what kind of feeling? What kind of love? At Christmas, he gave me a tiny sprig of holly and mistletoe. Now we talked of life, his childhood in Yorkshire and his ambition to study medicine, my brief marriage to Charles and the summer we shared in Whitby before my illness. To steal secret time with me, he would snatch 5 minutes from the end of his rigor mortis clinic and delay his daily appointments with the famous Molly Fisher, who stared endlessly at the door of the next vault. At first, he recorded fictitious symptoms in my notes as an excuse for his visits. But before long, the list of complaints was as thick as a copy of the Times, and he feared that the great and terrible Dr. O'Carroll would want to examine me himself. He must not suspect these visits, Richard said. A scandal would ruin him and destroy the resurrectionist cause. When spring arrived, he left me flowers gathered from the grounds, foxgloves, lilies and dog daisies. He arranged for a lamp to be left in my vault, although I rarely remembered to light it. Am I becoming like her? I asked him once as he was leaving my vault. Like whom? Molly Fisher. She just stares and screams. I do not wish to end like that. She was the first. Deterioration was more rapid in the early cases. So I will sit and stare at the door while you examine me and move my limbs and cut your appointments short. It will not be like that, I promise. Don't make promises, Dr. Morgan. My husband promised me so many things. I did not expect to fall in love with him, but I found myself pressing my ear to the spy hole for his footsteps. I counted imaginary heartbeats between visits. I could not bear to be without him. It was a spring morning when he stumbled into my vault, clutching a blood-stained handkerchief to his face. I sprang to him. "Dr. Morgan, are you hurt?" He shook his head. "A scratch. Molly Fisher scratched Cottrell and I had to help restrain her." "You poor man. Well, let me see." The Fisher child had clawed 3 deep gouges in his cheek. I wiped blood from the wound. "You must get that attended to," I said. "I needed to see you first, Sarah." He seized my hand and fell on one knee. "I have struggled against it. I have fought to hide it, but I cannot help myself. Sarah, I love and honor you above every woman. You are a wonder of resurrection, a vision enshrouded in formaldehyde. Richard, oh please, if we are discovered, I don't care." The door swung open. Flanked by the 2 mortuary attendants, Dr. O'Carroll glared at us. "I was told that you were injured, Morgan. I see that I am in time to prevent a far greater mishap. Come with us." The red-headed mortician stepped forward and seized Richard's arm. He did not struggle. The door slammed, and again I was entombed in darkness and silence. I do not know how many days I passed staring at the wall. Without Richard, death was once again a torment. I desired annihilation. So far did I sink that I ignored the familiar footsteps in the corridor outside and the rattle of the keys in the door. "Sarah." His voice was as thin as poison gas. As my heart leapt, I assured myself that it was yet another illusion sent to torment those amputated from life. "I am back." I felt his firm grip on my hands. I raised my eyes to see Richard before me, in the shroud of an inmate. His face was pale. A scar ran across his forehead, and his left eye rolled wildly in its socket. Wires from the galvanic battery on his back were plugged into his spine, brain, and jaw. I held him, my dear doctor, as he twitched in my arms. He smiled, and his jaw dropped open, revealing tombstone rows of blackened teeth. "I have come back to you, my dear, to stay."
Elegy Underground by Fiona McFarlane. By the time the angels came, nobody had any idea what they were. It wasn't just that people didn't talk about God anymore, but that nobody officially died and the afterlife was no longer required. That's how the portable cemeteries started, all the old graveyards having been turned into long lawns with swimming pools at the end of them, and the market in clandestine obituaries that meant people would answer the telephone to have names and dates whispered down the line before anyone could trace the call. And of course the illegal elegy smuggling, in which we played a dangerous part. Part of the problem was that the angels arrived at the same time we did, and people got us confused. We were a circus, and they were the messengers of the Almighty, but we dressed similarly. We all wore our hair long. For us, it was for the act. Philomena Tinkerbell could pull 11 of us along with one plait. Diamante Hollywood could walk up her own ponytail. Salmonella Jones could pull live fish, musical instruments, and, on special occasions, a tree from her curls. And I, Lacrimae Bird, hid the day's takings in my braids. The angel's hair, as far as we could tell, had no purpose, although it moved as if it had leaves in it. The kids got interested in the way it clogged the gutters. Otherwise it was useless, except that it was gold. A lot of people travelled in that time, moving from place to place, and a lot of people stayed still and waited for things to come to them. The seasons came, and so did night and day, the moon by now looking more like a comet than ever. But other things came, too. Men passed through towns setting up enormous screens onto which they shone movies that replicated in real time the static fuzz of sleep. In the inland places that had almost forgotten the sea, a troop of 30 fox-faced boys circulated an enormous ceramic trumpet that they unstopped at dusk. Scientists discovered that the resulting sound of the waves increased people's appetites. The plastic surgeons came and took photographs of everyone in town. 20 years later they came back with their grey gloves and steady banker's fingers and remade your face, if you wanted them to, according to your files. And because people struggled with memory, they looked forward most of all to the birthday visits of the biographers who offered to chronicle the past year and present it within a week, bound in blue leather. At that time, the people who stayed put could have almost anything they wanted if they waited long enough for the right person to arrive. Fingerprints bloomed from the briefcases of salesmen. Trucks shipped in comfortable temperatures. New words were delivered to the door every morning. The girls of one town wrote away for a merman, and he swam up the drainpipe and entertained all of them with his salty muscles from the bottom of a bathtub. The cemeteries came at night, moving slowly but always gone by morning. They were flat and wide and ungainly, and often had to skirt the towns that had narrow roadways, in which case you brought your dead out beyond the last low-roofed bungalow and waited by the highway. Some had real gravestones and ivy and their own dim moon. Others grew roses and little plaques and released doves for you at extra cost, and some were just box upon box or filing cabinets. The most expensive would let you revisit and leave flowers. The others you could just follow behind for a while, until you were more or less politely asked to move off. On the road, life meant never stopping, even if the whole place was filling up with angels. Our philosophy was that life was a journey, and it was only those of us who never stayed still who really understood it. Somehow we were all born to it, because we were all born nowhere. On aeroplanes, in the cabins of cruise liners, at train stations. With my mother, it was an ambulance that couldn't go fast enough. It was as if she'd given birth and then aimed me into the world with a kick, and I've kept moving ever since. Our act was all girls. There were companies similar to ours, but they performed naked and put their gymnastic abilities to other uses after the show. The difficulty was arriving at a new place and convincing people that we intended to keep our clothes on. On our first night, the audience was always entirely male. Salmonella Jones would stride out with her boots above her knees and her mass of hair. A low groan would come from the audience, a sound that grew legs and turned into a walking roar. But Salmonella's voice was larger than space, and as she spoke the girls began to tumble out of her hair, though I always felt it was her voice they were hiding in, slipping out through the O's and the P's. Soon the men forgot that our boots and coats could come off, because Sincerity Smith had wooden wings painted like a parrot's that grew naturally from the base of her neck, and Penicillin Brown could swim on a tightrope, and China Foxtrot swallowed bubble after bubble until she floated above the audience, blowing bubble after bubble back out of a long blue pipe. And my job, in every town and on every night, was to collect money for tickets, which I did out of a fishbowl from which I splashed the patrons who fainted when Mimosa and Murder, the Siamese twins, began pulling each other out of a hat. It took some time for every angel to get here, and they'd obviously been instructed not to start proceedings until everyone had arrived. In the meantime, the first few of them relaxed a bit and took a look around. They had the uncanny habit of peering massively into people's windows at exactly the time you realized it had gone dark without your noticing it. They weren't entirely solid, so sometimes you passed through them and realized it from a kind of gauzy feeling, and then you said, "Excuse me." Frighteningly, they had perfect pitch. We know this because they practiced their singing in their sleep, otherwise they kept very quiet. When it became clear that they weren't going to provide any services, People began to assume they were some kind of law enforcement group here to crack down on death. The cemeteries, the obituaries, the immoderate display of emotion, and, perhaps most of all, the elegy smuggling. It was this in particular that concerned us at the circus. It's true that we carried elegies. We were known for it in certain circles, and the more sympathetic of the graveyard men would tell the more persistent of their mourners about us. We hid them in Salmonella's hair, China's pipe, between the wooden feathers of Sincerity's wings. But most of all we hid them in my memory, which somehow had the strength of a tree. Other people with memories like mine had gone into business on their own, as biographers or fortune-tellers. All these people made a very comfortable living, because everyone was nostalgic for both the past and the future, and it wasn't unheard of for a biographer to stop work and stop himself, settling in the one spot, waiting for his own biographers to arrive. My theory about my memory is linked to my name. My mother called me Lacrimae because, like most people, she had forgotten the meaning of many words. But she didn't know that in naming me after tears in a forgotten language, she had waterproofed me for an unusual and dangerous kind of life. Life from a fishbowl, with a mind designed for remembering the dead. There was a time when I imagined my memory as a graveyard so vast and orderly that it lost its wheels and took root. It began on one small patch of ground and grew slowly outwards, covering parking lots and football fields. The older graves, elegies for humble fathers, lines on a patient sister, crumbled a little under the weight of the newer ones. But the souls of these dead sat humbly and patiently waiting for me to find them again. In each new town we distributed remembrances for the local dead with the tickets. Not to everyone, but randomly, and it was up to me to decide. None on the first night, then I gauged people by their reaction to my fishbowl. Did they stroke it and make low noises as if it were a cat? Did they try to throw things into it, or did they notice me at all hovering in my glass lung? As time went on, I became bolder and counted people off by number, or gave elegies to everyone wearing red. The elegies became riskier too. Some of them weren't about specific people at all, but about the things that had been forgotten, the insomniac's algebraic concentration, the quiet certitude of the knitter of bones, the writer of letters whose fingers bred blisters. And because they somehow resembled the impossible, memorable things we could do with our bodies, these elegies took root. We became quietly famous, in a way that meant we always had to be moving, leaving a town almost as soon as we got there, 2 nights, maybe 3. In some places we left immediately after the first performance, speeding on the highways the way the cemeteries do. Because of the angels who stood quietly now in supermarket aisles and flocked on the slopes of golf courses, the decision was made to stop smuggling elegies altogether. It seemed too risky under all that surveillance. Salmonella, our ringmaster, made the final call. She hunted them out of wings and boots and hair and fish bowls. There was nothing she could do about my memory. I told her she could trust me. My mother missed the hospital and prepared me for a riskier kind of life, full of leaving. I hear that when she left, they buried her in a country churchyard, one of the quick, tricky ones that knows the back routes and spends long winters lumbering by the docks of coastal cities. What would an elegy for her sound like? The only angel I've ever seen close up was the one who came to see the show. He seemed made up entirely of colours, and his teeth were bright as dithyrambs. No one but me expected that he might be wearing wings, and I must admit to being disappointed when he wasn't. He was so sadly official that he appeared entirely stationary, even when moving. But then when he stopped, every part of him kept on shifting, so he was never still. He drew his legs up to his chest to fit into the front row seat, and didn't seem to notice that he'd blocked the view of all the people behind him. He arrived a little late, just as the girls were somersaulting out of Salmonella's hair. They fell at his feet, nonplussed. Penicillin even used him later in her act, springboarding off one mythic knee to reach her tightrope. He watched the act with interest, I thought, his head even tilting upwards slightly as Diamante climbed up her thick ponytail, her own fairy tale prince. One of China's bubbles popped against his left temple as she hovered around his ear, almost big enough for her to sit in. But the applause just before the interval seemed to surprise him. He swung his head back and forward slowly to see what was making all the noise. And I noticed for the first time how hands clapping together resembled the angel's wings I had imagined. Flesh feathers making the sound of 1,000 of them in flight. The angel stood up to leave. He was so tall he was almost invisible, but was diminished somehow, like a powerful man who has forgotten something. As he passed my fishbowl, I swam up to meet him, breaking into the air as I never did during performances. The other girls were all bowing, and between the thumb and forefinger of his mammoth right hand I tucked my best elegy, my last. I watched him as he walked down the street, moving as if he were wearing ice skates, as if he were here for the end of the world. He bent his head over my elegy to make out the words. Like us, he had the air of someone who is always going away.
A Lasting Impression by Alexandra Baylis. When it was built in 1925, the palace, with its 7 floors, was considered high-rise. Now, modest in height, it is still arguably the best hotel in the area, 109 Canadian dollars standard double. Sound okay? I'd asked. Derek just stared at the road and shrugged. 5 years engaged, and there'd always been some reason not to marry. First there was the sex, then there was the money, then there was the fraud investigation, acquitted. Now he had begun to cultivate an ugly paunch. I was beginning to regret our marriage, and it hadn't even started yet. You might ask why we were together. You might well. The hotel was pretty from the outside. Large arched windows, slightly squared off, each pane sporting gold calligraphy. Coffee, tea, breakfast, lunch, dinner. A driving holiday in British Columbia was supposed to bring us closer together. The thought disgusted me somewhat. It still does. The lady behind the desk, blonde ponytail, plastic cheerleader legs, made no comment on my appearance. In my stocking feet and vile blue fleece, with muddy hiking boots in hand, I took the key I was offered and padded over to the lift. Though I suppose I looked worse later on, she made no comment then either. I rode up to the 3rd floor alone while Derek parked the car. The lift opened onto a narrow landing. Varnished dark wood floors, red runners, blue and orange flock wallpaper. Our room was less oppressive, French style, pastel green and cream. I drew myself a bath fractionally too hot, with the floral bubbles provided. By the time Derek came cursing into the room, I was already soaking. I heard him make straight for the minibar. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" He appeared at the bathroom door and snatched one of the glasses from the shelf over the sink. He had scraped the car trying to squeeze between a pickup truck and a dumpster. At the car hire place, he had laughed when I said we should get the accidental damage waiver. He was an excellent driver. Maximum no claims. Never had an accident in his life. "Oh, Derek, you didn't," I groaned. Well, that was it. Perhaps I should do the driving? What had I been doing anyway? He'd a mind to give me a slap. Oh, I didn't mean that, Derek, but... Well, you should have heard the names. Calm down, Derek. It doesn't matter. It's one of those things. Now I was patronising him. Now I was undermining his authority. Who was I to tell him to calm down? Who was I? And who would be paying for the damned car anyway? He came to the side of the bath. I thought he was going to apologise. You know, his shirt was untucked and the bottom button undone, and as he crouched down beside the bath, his dough belly squeezed with a plip over his belt. I felt like retching. He came too close to my cheek, his face puckered in rage. I was used to his anger, used to his names and threats and insecurities. He whispered into my ear, and the wisps of my hair recoiled from his breath and tickled my face. What he whispered was cruel, was ugly, a threat, a promise. He held his whiskey glass in one hand and, with the heel of the other, braced himself against the rim of the bath. Was I listening? Was I even listening to him? Did I not think he would do it? In truth, I wasn't really listening, but holding my breath so that I couldn't smell him, turning my eyes away so that I couldn't see the string of spittle stretched between his teeth. Did I not think he was man enough to do it? Did I not think he was a man? And then he was on his feet, above me. He brought his arm down hard and smashed the glass, and the liquid ran down the lovely Art Deco tiles. I sighed. Derek stood for a fraction of a second and stared at me. Lying below him in the bath, I stared right back. Then he stormed out of the bathroom, as usual, leaving someone else to clean up his mess. He took the keys from the dresser and slammed the door behind him. It was a struggle to get out of the bath. Perhaps I was dizzy from the heat, I'd wondered. At last, seeing that I had begun to shrivel, I heaved myself from the water. I was glad that the mirror over the sink was steamed up, as I was sure I looked a shock. My head was pounding, from the argument, from the too hot bath. In the bedroom I lay on the dishevelled sheets. I must have fallen asleep because I didn't see her arrive. She wore a peacock green dress in silk, which fell in strips like feathers. Her hair was short and stopped suddenly at her jawline. A silver slide held it back on one side. On the other, it fell across her eye and one half of her forehead. She was seated in the chair under the window, and I noticed it was dark outside. I must have been asleep for a few hours, I'd thought. It wasn't like Derek to be gone so long. He had these tantrums, he stormed out, but he always came back with his tail of sorts between his legs. "What are you doing in my room?" She looked at me and smiled. She said it was not my room at all, but hers. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, love." She shook her head. No, she had had this suite for 70 years. It was hard to see her face. The window threw her into silhouette, but she did not seem to be old enough for that to be true. "There must be a mistake. Perhaps it's a different room you stayed in. This is the 3rd floor." She said she was happy to share. She said she was glad of the company. I got up from the bed, now damp as well as crumpled from where I'd been lying. I was still wet. Maybe I hadn't slept so long after all. I looked down, and my hands immediately went to cover myself up. "Sorry," I said. She giggled, a young woman's laugh. "Look, maybe I'll call the concierge and we can sort you out another room." She laughed again, louder, and gestured to the telephone with a long cigarette holder. Without taking my eyes from her, I reached for the telephone on the bedside table. I dripped onto the nightstand, and the receiver slipped through my still damp hand, once, twice. I looked at her suspiciously, and she laughed again. I think that was the moment when I began to panic. and didn't even stop to ask myself why I hadn't done so already. "Look, I don't know what you're doing here, but you can't stay." My voice wavered. She held up her palms, the cigarette emitting a long arc of smoke as she did so, and told me to calm down. I remembered Derek then, that I had said the same to him. "My fiancé will be back soon and—" At this, she gave a derisive yelp and stood up from the chair. She came toward me and told me not to be so naive. Derek wouldn't be back. They don't come back afterwards, she'd informed me. That was a myth. She tipped her head back and took a drag on a cigarette. It was this that caused the bang of hair across her right temple to fall back. A fluke. An habitual tic. I think I gagged. Her eye, from the top of the cheekbone to the upper lid, was tilted back into her head, caved in. A flap that might fall open if she leaned forward. And above that, nothing but bone, like broken china. Embarrassed, she tugged her forelock back over her face and made a gesture with her hand as if to bat something away. "What happened to you?" She told me she'd been pressing her husband's suit when she came across a piece of paper. The Palace Hotel, Kamloops, it had read, room 36. She had always suspected his disloyalty. At least I never had to worry about that with Derek. But never the temper. He took the lamp stand, Art Deco number in brass with coloured glass inlay and, well, let's just say that the design made such an impression that she just couldn't get it out of her head. I sat down on the corner of the bed. I felt the exhaustion return and wondered if I was ill. Perhaps that's why I took it so well. "So you're—" I asked. "Yes," she said matter-of-factly. She was indeed one of those. She had been here ever since. "And you want me to tell someone?" She laughed again. She told me to tell whomever I wanted. Nobody would listen to me. She shrugged. 70 years was a long time, she said. Her husband was probably dead. "But what about Derek?" she asked. "Did I love him?" "We're engaged," I replied, and lay my head back on the pillow. She scoffed and said that she could see right through me. "No," I admitted, "no, I don't love him." She wondered then why had I let him treat me so badly? Why had I put up with him? Alone is worse than together under any circumstances. At least I'm not alone. She shook her head. Was she not proof that that was untrue? I suppose, but still... I yawned. She smiled at me tenderly with her head on one side, her good side. Perhaps, she said, I would have changed my mind by morning. The next thing I remember is being woken by voices. The radio? In the bathroom. I felt blurry. Light streamed through the open curtains. I marvelled at my capacity to sleep after such a steaming row. "Derek," I called. "Is that you? You woke me. Look, I'm sorry." The carpet around the bed squelched underfoot, shattering the dream of the night before. A man in blue overalls emerged from the bathroom. Maintenance. "Oh, great! Look, there's water everywhere. Oh, hello, why the camera?" I laughed. No reply. No wonder I realised when I glanced down I was still naked. "Oh, I'm so sorry. If I could just get into the bathroom for a towel." He went out onto the landing where another man stood, breathing heavily and leaning over his knees. Inside the bathroom, a third man, in a suit, stood with his back to me. "Derek?" He turned. Not Derek. And approached. He didn't look at me. Instead, he continued to walk until I had to back away, and even then I wasn't sure how he had left the room with me standing in the doorway. even when I looked down at the bath still full, but with no bubbles left, and saw the glass, and saw the blood, and saw the woman there naked and soaking wet, and with the thick base of a tumbler embedded in her skull, I did not completely understand. Silly girl. Only when I knelt where he had, and looked into my open eyes, only then did I get it. Standing, I glanced into the unsteamed mirror. I sighed and dripped profusely onto the pretty hand-painted tiles. "Well," offered a familiar voice, "at least you're not alone."
Father's Day by Ian Dudley. She always visits her father on the day she died. She knows he cannot see or hear her, but she comes anyway. And though he never acknowledges her, she can tell by the way he shakes his head that he is troubled by her ghost. This year, her visit was even less successful than usual, and she wonders if she'll come again. But she knows she will. She cannot turn her back on him the way he did on her. As a child, she never liked her father's devotion to the elders, with their easy certainty and doubtless perfection. But it was only when her mother died in an accident, and he started loving God more than his daughter, that things went really bad. 2 years later, and still solid with grief, she made the mistake of telling him she didn't believe anymore. Instead of getting his attention, this increased his love for God to the point at which he disowned her. He must have been as damaged by her mother's death as she was, but she had not understood that at the time, and nor had he. He said, by renouncing her faith, she had died anyway, and that this was kinder. Instead of trying to dissuade him, the elders helped arrange the implants that killed her. They said a man had a right to believe what he wanted. For weeks after the operation, she wept whenever she saw him. Serene and numb from his bereavement, he hadn't seen or heard her. Self-preservation drove her to move out a few days after her 16th birthday. She swore she would never go back, but that was easier to say than do. This time, she needed to put the address of her apartment into her father's terminal. He would never see it, of course, but he was looking so much older these days, and if he was taken ill, someone might think to contact her. Maybe that was why she allowed herself to scan his implants for the first time. Or maybe it was just professional curiosity. Either way, she got what she deserved. She was revolted by the crude and nasty piece of work she found, more disfigurement than surgery. It would have been a kindness to remove them, but he had made his choice, and she couldn't allow herself to change his mind without the consent he could never give her. She turned her face up to the sky and let the thin rain fall. She was glad that she had decided to walk from his house to her flat. Sometimes it was good to be in the real world. It was late, and the streets were empty. People thought that hers was a bad area simply because it was poor, but she had never had any problems. A movement drew her attention to the man waiting at the end of the street. Her hand reached into her bag. "ID check," said the officer. She knew that it was pointless. She saw her ID card lying on the table in her father's flat. She'd used it to scan her new address into his terminal and had forgotten to put it back. She smiled hopefully at the officer. Stony-faced, he asked her name, downloaded her biometrics onto his handheld, and scanned her. Assured that she was who she said she was, he checked her record. The white screen where her belief should have been reflected in his visor. Immediately the officer became hostile and suspicious. It was a depressingly familiar response. Her blank slate of faiths and preconceptions made her a good finder, but was no other comfort. People knew how to deal with believers. They could be classified, profiled, and predicted, but people like her were capable of anything. Eventually, the officer issued her with a notice to present her ID at the nearest police station within 24 hours and let her go. She arrived home angry and exhausted. Not owning a cat, she aimed a kick at the core under her bed. "I felt that," it messaged. "No, you didn't." They had a long-running argument about whether the core was sentient. On the occasions when its advanced logic unit really pissed her off, she called it a computer, and it would sulk for hours in an attempt to persuade her it had a personality. The core was a gift from a grateful client and had allowed her to get out of fringe work and go legitimate. She had taught it all she knew about finding. She was smart but only human. The core never slept and could sift petabytes of information in a few hours. Together, they had skills that corporations would pay good money for, especially if it meant they did not have to get their own hands dirty. She went into the small bathroom, leaving the door to the bedroom open. She brushed her teeth, washed her face, and looked up at last, wondering how long the man standing in the bedroom behind her had been watching. The man was wearing a cheap black suit, white shirt, and had no distinguishing marks, no jewelry, logos, tattoos, or symbols. She turned round slowly. The door to the apartment was ajar and had been forced. She fought to control her anger and fear. "Who the hell are you?" "I am Truth," he smiled. "Get out." Unperturbed, he produced a holograph. "Recently you had a visit from this girl." She tried not to recognize the picture. She had always been disturbed by the superstitious awe she inspired in fringe clients who treated her more like a seer than a data analyst. But she could find things that their beliefs would not allow them to see or even look for, and that was why every finder knew that without confidentiality there were no clients. Looking past the picture into the man's face, she could see that in this case denial was impossible. "I provided her with some information." There was a knot in the pit of her stomach. She opened a channel to the core and sent a question mark. "He has Class 2 implants, stealthed and firewalled, but we can use them against him if we have to," it sent back. Truth stared at her. "The information you provided this girl caused her to reject her beliefs. As a finder, this means nothing to you. You have no beliefs. But she will go to hell. Can you imagine that?" It was more of a threat than a question. "She made her own choices." "She was a child." The finder blushed. The girl had got her name from an old fringe client and had arrived at her door desperate and sad. She had the same questions and doubts as many kids of her age, but in her case there was no one she could talk to, certainly not her parents. Which was why she'd been foolish enough to ignore the fact that the girl lied about her age, and it was illegal even to speak to her. Truth reached inside his jacket and withdrew a piece of dull grey ceramic shaped like a leaf and held it towards her. It was too purely functional to be called a knife. It was simply a blade, a perfect cutting edge. "The girl has rich parents," messaged the core. "Rich and angry." Truth looked into her eyes. "You think you are going to die, but you won't. You will suffer eternally for what you have done." She thought about locking herself in the bathroom, but he would catch her long before she was safe. She could stand and fight, but she knew how that would end. And she could try to subvert his implants like the core said, but even if that were possible, it would be a finite amount of time before they could take control. He would know as soon as they made a move, and she would be dead before they could do a thing. So instead, she waited to be killed. The apartment door swung open. "Showtime," messaged the call. Truth heard the noise behind him and hesitated. The shock on her face made him glance over his shoulder. In the doorway stood a middle-aged man dripping wet with rain. In his right hand was an ID card he kept glancing at as if he could not remember or believe what he read. The man looked into Truth's face and then peered round him into the empty room. He looked down at the card and back at Truth and shook his head. For Truth, the madman was an inconvenient loose end to be tidied away as quickly and efficiently as possible. He stepped towards the man, smiling, the leaf knife hidden in the back of his hand. She was 0.78 seconds into a core-facilitated infiltration of Truth's implants when she realized she had not quite thought things through. Truth was going to kill her father while she watched, unable to move or speak, immersed in his killer's mind. She panicked, and Truth sensed her presence. He turned instantly. He could kill the man any time, but the girl and the machine in his head were a real threat. He stepped back towards her, his blade level with her heart. 1.2 seconds into the infiltration, she unleashed all her anger and fear into his root-level implants, a brute force attack that sent the left side of his body into spasm and his heart rate rocketing. For a dreadful moment she thought she had killed him, but he took another step towards her with the resolution of a man who knows he is fighting for his life. She hurt him again until he gagged with pain and stopped moving. "They underestimated you," the core messaged in disgust. "They should have sent a real assassin." The euphoria of finding herself alive quickly faded. She, her father, and Truth stood as if caught in a game of statues. The instant she released Truth, he would try to kill them. The obvious solution was to kill him, but that was beyond her, and a dead body would be the beginning, not the end of her problems. She felt angry and exhausted and scared and wished that she could simply disappear. After a few minutes, her breathing slowed and she became calm. Almost abstractedly, she set to work. She didn't have the time to make what she needed from scratch, but fortunately she didn't need to. She had a model to hand. While she implanted, patched and grafted, she was aware of the core working in the background, covering her tracks, putting a barrier of false memory around her changes so obscene and illegal that even if Truth suspected that his mind had been tampered with, there was a very good chance he would not dare ask anyone to investigate. And if they did, the whole intervention would disappear without a trace, leaving a patch of unrecoverable memory. Trembling at the thought of what might happen, she took the knife out of Truth's hand and placed it in the holder inside his jacket, letting go the last threads of control she held over his mind. He woke and looked at her. He moved his head from side to side as if there was something at the edge of his vision that disappeared when looked at head-on. At last he gave up and walked straight out of the room, brushing past the forlorn man in the doorway. She looked at her father, and for the first time in 7 years, he looked back.